All right, it's time to begin our class. We'll ask Phil Parker if he would lead us in opening prayer. Amen. Thank you. We've been studying. We've finished Daniel, the 7th chapter. We're working on the 8th chapter. Probably going to have to pick up the pace a little bit. I'm dragging behind schedule. But we'll be continuing on and I think hopefully finishing up the 8th chapter today. We've laid a lot of the framework, the groundwork. What do you recall? We've talked about Daniel, who he was. At this time, how old was he probably? Do you remember? About somewhere around 539 BC in that area. Remember, that may put him in his probably 70s or 80s. He's an old man at this stage, but still very much interested in his people, in the Jewish people, and what will become of them. Particularly in this chapter, I believe it's written to sustain the people of God under pressure. It is the same purpose that we really find throughout the entire book. That's also, one of the commentators made a note, isn't that what we're trying to do today, is to teach ourselves and be taught how we do sustain our Christianity, particularly when we fall under pressure. And the ongoing theme of Daniel is that God's will will be done, and he may use those who are evil and wicked, but he will also dispose of them. Whatever he says is going to happen will happen. In this case, the oppressor comes to power through transgression, and when the transgressors are come to the full. We're going to find the transgressors. Who are the transgressors in this chapter? It's a bit of a surprise, perhaps. Transgressors are going to be the people of God. They're not going to be the outside enemy. These are the enemies from within. So let's move forward. So in the 3rd year of Belshazzar, I was wrong, 547 BC, not 539. 2 years after the first vision, and this vision places Daniel in Shushan, Susa, on the banks of the river Ulai, a wide man-made irrigation canal that's mentioned only here and in verse 16. Now let's back up for a minute. This is identified as being in the 3rd year of King Belshazzar. What kingdom was King Belshazzar over? Babylonian. Okay. Susa became ultimately, or was actually probably at this point even, the capital of Medo-Persia. It was also the ancient capital of the Elamite Empire. So Daniel is writing in Babylon about, and again, the Babylonians controlled this area at one time, but I presume about an area that they probably don't even control right now. And so he's in a vision. He's been carried, and he sees very clearly this area and the canal, the river Ulai. I'm not even sure if he had even heard of that before, but he knows what it is from the dream and from whatever knowledge he had obtained. actually the palace of Xerxes it was discovered in 1880, 1890, and much of that has been recovered. This vision, he says, appeared unto me, even me, Daniel. Now, if anybody wanted to argue whether Daniel wrote or did or did not write the book of Daniel, that probably puts that to sleep. And he asserts that otherwise as well. So after that which appeared to me first, he's already had one vision. This was a follow-up vision to him. In Ezekiel, the 8th chapter, I'm going to move ahead. I should lay the framework. This idea of being transported for a dream, we know at least a couple of times in Ezekiel, the 8th chapter, verses 1 through 5, Ezekiel says, and he's talking about the time frame, he stretched out the form of a hand and took me by a lock of my hair, and the Spirit lifted me up between earth and heaven and brought me in visions of God to Jerusalem. And he's now going to give a scene from Jerusalem. So we definitely find that this has happened, and he's talking now about the trespass against the temple. Likewise in Revelations, John says, so he carried me away in the Spirit into the wilderness. And there he sees the vision of the woman sitting on the scarlet beast and so forth. So these are not uncommon events, but it's good to note that these were actually visions that were had, but it was as if they were, in reality, had been transported to an entirely different region, and then they were looking, as it were, I guess we can imagine the visual things that you can put on today, and you think you're actually there. Well, he was actually there in his mind and in his spirit. We find, we had 4 beasts in the 7th chapter. Now we're going to find we get more. We get down specifically one a ram with 2 horns, with 1 hire. The hire came up last. That fits the supremacy we've talked about of the Persian Empire. The Medes were more prominent until Cyrus the Great, and then at that point, the Medes, the Persians became the greater force. So this was the bear that had one side higher than the other. It's equivalent to that same one. It pushed westward, northward, and southward. You recall we talked about the map, and I showed that that for Persia they would have pushed westward, northward, and then they would have pushed southward back against Egypt. And of course, that would have included the land of Judah and Israel. No beast could stand before him. He did according to his will. And over we find these kings. And magnified himself. And that seems to just set you up for failure. So magnifying, he boasted, he promoted himself, speak proudly, to see himself as large and excellent. Then comes a male goat. And what was one of the first interesting descriptions about that male goat coming over the horizon? What did it say about his feet? Didn't appear to be touching the ground. He was coming so fast, right? So, and that really would have been true of Alexander's troops. They moved very, very quickly and could cover a great deal of ground, and they won many battles because of that. A notable horn between his eyes. This fits just precisely. Now keep in mind, we're back in 547 BC, Alexander comes along in 340s in that area, so roughly 200 years later. And then we're going to talk about Antiochus, who comes along about 165, so about 400 years later. That's why many of the modernists in the 1800s began to say, well, Daniel came along about 200, 150 BC, so he was very accurate because he was talking about what had already occurred. He just took history and kind of fluffed it up and made it look real good as if it were prophecy. And of course, that is not the case and not what had happened. That realm ran with furious power the goat ran with furious power at the realm. Do any of you all know the history of the Medo-Persians and then the Greeks? The Greeks up to this time frame had really been individual city-states. Philip, father of Alexander, had managed to unify those city-states that had done a real good job of just keeping each other weakened and into a pretty mighty force. And then Alexander inherited the kingdom after the murder of his father. The Medo-Persians, had pretty much occupied everything. We looked at that map and everything all the way over to India, all the way up through what's modern-day Turkey, right at the cusp of Greece, all the way over to Egypt. The Greeks made the mistake of trying to fill in and help. I think it was Athens. It was Athens, I believe, was the one that had helped in an uprising in the Turkey area. What's Turkey today? And then because of that got the Medo-Persians to say, all right, it's time to move on and just put these people under our thumb too. They came up, they had attacked, they had continued. There were a lot of raids and attacks, but essentially, and I'm ahead of myself, they were first defeated at the plains of Marathon. That was kind of the turning point. But there had been a lot of this, the Medo-Persians of pushing in and making raids. And so it had enraged the Greeks. And this finally got triggered enough to where the furious he-goat with the one great mighty horn came thundering over the horizon. The realm had no power to withstand him. The male goat cast him to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one who could deliver the realm. There was nobody that he could appeal to. Rick?
I think looking at history, if it hadn't been for the Medo-Persians and the raids and the destruction that they had tried to reign in the Macedonian and Grecian area, Philip wouldn't have been able to.
Yeah, that actually was your good point. That actually was really much the basis of the unification, was to be able to, individual city-states had not been able to resist. And so even though one city did, with some assistance, Athens did defeat them at the Battle of Marathon. Xerxes then was defeated in a sea battle 10 years later afterward, but then Alexander came along and he routed the Persians 334 BC at the Battle of Granicus, which was really at where Greece and Turkey now and maybe Macedonia now come together, or nearly. There's a waterway there, and then on into about middle part of Turkey in Issus. So that's this event that we're talking about happening, and from there, basically the Persian resistance pretty much began to collapse. The Greeks did push all the way over, as the map shows. This is now showing the extent. Well, that's not really true. This is showing the areas that were divided up between the generals. The main horn was broken, right? And out of it came 4 horns, and then up came a little horn, and we're going to be talking about that in a minute. So this is a map just to give you a little bit of an idea. We find, and my wife says, don't move the pointer around, it drives me crazy. So she's not here, but I'll try to. So we up in this area, we're almost up to Russia, we're getting in. This is the Indus River. So this is India, all up in this area, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and then we come on over to Iran. But all the way back, let's see if I can get it back here. Come back here. I lost it. Doesn't want to get on there again. All right. Whoop. Uh-oh. I may be in trouble now. I just messed myself up. Let's see. See if it's going to come back, I hope. Oh, I forgot what the pen is. Brian, what's the pen? I knocked it off. What's the pen? I'm sorry. Oh, it's still up here. Okay. I was just fooling around with the mouse.
Are you sure you clicked the right one? You shouldn't need the pen. But yeah, you did audio room.
Yeah, I did it backwards. You're right. Yeah, you're right. Still moving it too much on him. Move those down out. All right. So let's move ahead while we can. Before we leave this I wanted to show and just remind that anytime anybody from this area wanted to come against Egypt, they came through the contested area, and likewise from Egypt going the other way. So this left, and most of this is Israel, modern day Israel, and Israel of that time frame. In this case, there was particularly a lot of contest between the Seleucid Empire, which really headquartered more out of modern day Syria, and then the Ptolemies out of Egypt. So you can see how the Jerusalem and the area of the Jews were going to be impacted just constantly between these battles back and forth. The Antigones lasted for a little while back over in the area of Greece and Rome, and then Lysander, I believe was the other, did not last very long at all. But these two kingdoms did last for considerably longer. If I can get it, let's see. There we go. All right. So, why focus on these two kingdoms? Well, let's see. For starters, under the Persian Empire, what Daniel had been looking forward to, the return of those in captivity, which really was just a portion of them, but nonetheless they were allowed to go back, occurred under the Persians. So they played a pretty important role in that regard, and were generally relatively supportive of the Jews. Occasionally, back and forth, they would lose a little bit of support, and then they would, but ultimately they were allowed to rebuild Jerusalem, the walls, and the temple. Now, the Greeks played a very different role. They several things. The language of the New Testament, which was pretty much a worldwide language, was what? Greek. So it made it a lot easier for Christianity to spread once that time occurred. But they also had a very strong culture, one they were very proud of. And so when we use the term Hellenizing or Hellenic, I suppose, Jews, we're talking about those of the Greek customs. So they had a very strong impact upon the land itself and the culture and the religions, far more than did the Persians. And that continued really on into the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire actually pretty much adopted the Greek culture and language for a very long time. It was both the culture and the language of the Romans as well. So that was the culture that Jesus came into when he was born. So this had an impact immediately, but it also had an impact long term. Now, immediately, and I say immediately, 400 years later, it's going to lead to Antiochus doing the things that he did. The male goat grew very strong. I'm going back a little bit now. He whipped the ram. He becomes strong, really strong, and then his horn is broken. In his place, there came up 4 notable horns to the 4 winds. So essentially, this was going to fill in the kingdom that was left by Alexander, the single horn. One of those was a little horn that came out, and it grew exceedingly great toward the south and the east. Now, if you think about going from the capital of the Greeks, of their kingdom, the Seleucidae, down, you were going to come south and then probably kick over a little bit east. You'd come down the route that's right beside the Mediterranean Sea, and then you're going to kick over a little bit east to get to Jerusalem. So very likely, I don't know for sure that was the meaning, but I think it was, toward the east and toward the glorious land. Now, I think we understand the glorious land, but I did make a few notes. Jeremiah talks about give you a pleasant land, a beautiful heritage of the host of nations. This is why they would call it a glorious land. Also keep in mind, the climate was different back then. Israel had quite a bit more rainfall than it has today. And it had quite a bit more vegetation. All of this area was pretty well vegetated. Egypt had quite a bit more vegetation than it has today. Ezekiel 20:6 said, into a land I have searched for them, flowing with milk and honey, the glory of all lands. And then finally in Daniel, he talks about the land of Israel's glorious land in 16 and 41, chapter 11, and then the glorious holy mountain. So this was not only a special land because God provided it to the Jews, but because apparently it was really glorious and stood out as a desirable land as well. Now, I'm doing too much lecturing, so I'll start to kind of go the other way here a little bit. But so this horn grew up to the host of heaven. What's the host of heaven? I guess I give it away up there. You know, we look at that, and sometimes we get carried away, and we think, well, that's got to be talking about the angels. And we'll find some references in the Bible along those lines. But here we're really talking about, I believe, the people of God. He cast down some of the host. And this version was some of the stories I quoted it from, I think, McGigan's, and trampled them. So some of the people and some of their leaders were cast down and either destroyed or in somehow diminished. He exalted himself even as the prince of the host. So who would the prince of the host be? Pretty clear, right? It's God. And so he put himself forth as being equal to God, which obviously is a pretty serious mistake for any leader to do on this earth. The horn took away the daily sacrifices. How often did the Jews sacrifice? Generally, on a regular day, not talking about feast days. They had both morning and evening sacrifices. He took those away. He took the place of the sanctuary was cast down. That's God's temple, the sanctuary within the temple. Because of the transgression, an army was given to him. But guess what the army was? It was the host. So the people who should have been serving God were given to him to help him carry out the cessation of the sacrifices and casting truth to the ground. And if you go throughout the Bible, we think of the truth as being God's Word. That's correct. But I think there's also a huge emphasis put upon truth, holding to the truth, seeking the truth in every regard. If we speak the truth, we do not speak a lie. Therefore, we must prize the truth, especially the truth from God. And I think that in this case, if we look at further in a minute at the description of Antiochus, we'll see that he was using people who are not committed to the truth, not only to the truth of God, but to the truth, and then use that against them, and had them join in him on carrying out his what he was trying to do. He did in all this, he prospered. Now that just had to not be very happy for the Jewish people. This man was doing wicked. He even went so far as to not destroy, but desecrate the temple. All the way back, leading up to the capture of Jerusalem, the Jewish people believed that never would God allow anybody to desecrate his temple. And they were wrong. So he did all this and prospered, at least for a little while. So we find in 13 and 14, another Holy One asking the certain Holy One speaking, how long will this vision be? We're going to touch on this, and then we're going to come back around. Wasn't quite sure how to present this, and so we're going to come back with more detail in a minute. But how long shall this be, this vision that we're talking about? Wherein the daily sacrifices are not done, and the transgression of the desolation continues. The giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot. Now, did this happen because God lacked power? Does anything bad on this earth happen because God lacks the power to stop it? No. No. He allows things to occur. He allowed Satan to be on this earth to tempt us. He's able at any time to squash that if he chooses to. So this was not because he lacked power, it was because the people were evil. This is what Daniel knew. Daniel knew that even at his time, that the people really were not ready. That's the next chapter. He's going to be praying about that they weren't really ready to serve God. Well, it got worse. It got far worse. One of the good things is, by and large, the Jews never really served other idols, except some apparently did. But by and large, they did not. But otherwise, they really were not doing that which was good. And so Antiochus gained his power because the people, their transgression, and the casting down of the truth. It's going to last 2,300 days. Well, let me get my calendar out, and I'll start working at that. Remember, for the Jews, a regular year was 360 days, not 365. And then they would have intercalary adjustments, kind of like we have leap days. Well, they had, I guess, leap months. And so ever so many years, they would have an additional month to get back on track with the moon, with the sun, and the revolution of the earth. So the end of the vision, though, take note, is at the cleansing of the sanctuary. Now, we're fairly comfortable that occurred apparently December 25th, 164 BC. Also take note that the written language, we talked early about this, changes now from Aramaic to Hebrew. And that generally was because we believe that Daniel was trying to really make emphasis and impact to the Hebrew people rather than using the more common Aramaic that was spoken by pretty much all people. The Jews would have been speaking Aramaic, as well as Hebrew. If I get that to go. So, 2,300 days. As we always have with any numbers, numbers can be a literal or they can be symbolic. And the best way we can figure that out generally is from the context, from the explanations given within the book. And so we look at it. Now, there are different ways of looking at this. Some have suggested that we can say, all right, 2,300 days, 2 sacrifices per day, we're missing each sacrifice. So if we miss 2,300 sacrifices, that's really 1,150 days. And then they use that to go one direction or the other. We know that 2,300 doesn't have any particular symbolic use like 7 would or 10 or 6 or 40 or 70. Homer Haley says he felt this was the oppression of Israel and the desolation of the sanctuary shall not reach the full duration of a period of divine judgment. There is more to come. And I will tell you now, I tend to agree with that. I think McGuigan really ends up coming down on that as well. In other words, the people are sinning, they've done wrong, and they're going to suffer for a time frame because of that, but it won't reach 7 years. Here, if you break 2,300 down, which I think does make sense to do, 6 years and 140 days. So it's short of 7 years. We used previously times and half a time, and in the sense of not being 7, being a broken 7, actually in that case half of 7. So if that were true, then that would say, all right, God has circumscribed the power of this, of Antiochus. He's not allowed him to go as fully. And further, very probably, there's more to come. He's only going to do part of it, and the rest of the 7 is going to be filled in later on. So McGuigan likewise falls short of 7 years. His power falls short of completeness. His authority is circumscribed by God. And he made note of Matthew 24:22, and that's a good verse. Remember what it said there, that God shortened the days for the elect's sake whenever Jerusalem was surrounded and fell. The shortening, the circumscribing, the not letting it go all the way. And this likely is what we're talking about, 2,300. A third option I won't get into in a whole lot. Anthony Holcomb had produced the 1,150 days with 2 sacrifices each day, 3 years plus approximately 70 days. If you correct it for the intercalary, maybe 55 days. Comparing Maccabees, and he went to Maccabees, there was exactly 3 years between the first heathen sacrifice. That's what they were doing, by the way, was they were sacrificing to heathen idols on the altar, and the resumption of the regular services on the altar after the temple had been won back by Judas Maccabeus. He said that was from December 25, 168, December 25th, 165, and then the order to stop offering the sacrifice occurred before December 25th, 168, therefore possibly accounting for the additional 55 days. Either way, I think I've covered that here in a minute. Let's see. In summary, the fulfillment of the dream occurred in the time frame around Antiochus Epiphanes and the desecration of the temple. So we're pretty certain that's what this is talking about. Daniel's prophecy was made around 547 BC. I'd already made that note, 334 and 164. It served as a warning and an encouragement to God's people, helping them to understand that this desecration was a result of their own unfaithfulness. I think it's incredibly hard for us to understand how hard this was for the Jews. All this time they'd been in captivity. They still longed to go back to the temple, to Jerusalem, to how things used to be, to where we have a temple and God comes to the temple and we come and we meet with Him, or the priest do. And this is us. This is our essence. We're God's people. And now they've seen it diminished, even the rebuilt one, diminished even to the point that they're offering all sorts of ugly things upon the, and apparently a lot of really ugly things being done within the temple. So, Daniel, good news for you. I'm gonna keep the 70 years, okay? And the Jewish people are going to be allowed to return. And yes, you're going to rebuild the temple and you're going to rebuild the walls. Oh, but then after that, there's going to be this horrible beast of a person who comes out of the Greek Empire, and he's going to come in here and he's going to totally desecrate. He's going to stop the sacrifice from being offered, and instead going to use them for heathen purposes. Wow. And so we'll talk in a minute about Daniel's reaction to that. So Daniel was seeking the meaning of the vision, and we talk about the appearance of a man on the banks of the Ulai. Calls out, says, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. Well, who's Gabriel? He's an angel. How do we know that? Mentioned, let's see, the birth of John, he was mentioned, wasn't he? And then the birth of Jesus, he was mentioned, right? And then in Revelations, he wasn't, but also that was the two right up above, right? The message to Mary. So Daniel is afraid and falls on his face. And again, I think McGigan suggested that. You know, I don't think we have the respect for God that we should. And I worry a little bit that maybe I'm even too casual in my prayer. I don't know. Jim McDonald one time had really felt maybe we really need to get down on our knees and pray, but I guess get kneelers like the Catholics, but not pray like they do. But nonetheless, I think we need to be far more humble in God's presence, and I think we become pretty casual if we're not careful about it. Here is an angel that appears to him, and he falls on his face, and that's the same thing that happened. Isaiah says, "Woe is me, I'm undone." Ezekiel falls on his face. John falls at his feet as one dead. These men understood what it meant to be in the presence of God, even the angels really that we're talking about. All right, so at the end of time, let's talk about that for a minute. Or at the time of the end. Say it the right way. A lot of people say the end of time, don't they? At the time of the end. That's a phrase similar to the day of the Lord. Something's going to be carried out. Something's going to happen. This is a phrase that really speaks of the Lord's work in judging the ungodly and normally delivering His people. Nahum, the judgment on Nineveh. Zephaniah, though, his judgment of Judah. The time of the end includes two things, and I like this breakout. I think that was McGigan. A time's appointed by God for when this is going to occur, and then an end of the vision, a completing of the elements of the vision at a time God has ordained. He is in charge. He's allowed this man to run amok for some time, but now there's going to be a judgment, and now there's going to be somebody paying for what they've done. And this is what we mean by the time of the end. It's not the end of the world. It is rather a time within the time frame that will occur in which it will be fulfilled. Habakkuk 2:2 and 3 uses for the vision is yet for the appointed time, and it hasteth toward the end, and shall not lie. If God decrees this is going to happen, it's going to happen. Now, whenever He has chosen, that's going to be the end of that vision, of that event, of whatever is being foretold. The point is, the fulfillment of the vision is sure, and that fulfillment will be no accident. So, again, this assurance to God's people is the same assurance we have. Over and over and over, God has said, this is going to happen, and it happened. And that's part of the assurance, even though it's not a very pretty scene that's happening with the desecration of the temple, yet on the other hand, there is the assurance that God will prevail. And that's what carries me through life. I see all sorts of wicked get away with things and are rewarded, and especially today we see a lot of things going on in our own country. But as Christians, we trust in God, and His will is going to be done. And it's fine for us to pray and to hope for things to occur, but best to say, thy will be done, as His Son did. Each time of end must be examined in context. The time of the end here deals with the Seleucid boss and his persecution of the Jews. 1127 refers to the end of the Seleucid and Ptolemean kingdoms. In 12:4, it's a reference to the conflict. Now we're headed to the Romans and Jews, at least in his opinion. I think I agree with him on that. And 11 and 13, the similar phrase, at the end of some years. That's really what he's saying is at the appropriate time, at the time that the appropriate time has occurred, in some years, this is going to happen. Any thoughts or comments where we are thus far? I want to look for just a minute at Daniel's reaction, because I think it's good for us to understand it. So intensely affected, he swooned, he fainted. But then he was set back upright, and he's now well aware. I don't think I can overemphasize this. This is a very righteous, godly man who loves God, and he loves his people very much. And it's enough to make him pass out. It's like sometimes you see on a show that somebody's told, well, so-and-so's died, and they just pass out. Well, that's probably 10 times, 100 times that with his reaction. The latter time of the indignation, it belongeth to the appointed time of the end. I've changed gears now a little bit. Heidi says the latter time of indignation equals the appointed time of the end. These are the same things. That's the language that's used. Indignation's an expressing or experiencing of intense anger. In this instance, his anger is against his own people, just like in Isaiah 10 and 5, 26 and 20, because of their transgression following the invasion of Alexander. I want to go forward in a minute on that. Alexander was a very strong advocate of Greek philosophy and religion. He spent time in Palestine because it took him a while. You remember we talked Wednesday about the conquering of Tyre. What Alexander had figured out, for those who were not here, he kept fighting naval battles, and the Babylonians, the Medo-Persians had very good navies. And so finally he just closed all the harbors, and that took care of their navies. They had nowhere to come to land to reprovision and go. So he just mitigated the power they had. Now, Tyre was an island, a fortified island, and you would, trying to occupy it would be like World War II, trying to go on the beaches of Normandy and attack from that direction. So they built a causeway from the mainland out to Tyre behind protection of giant wooden walls, protective walls, built a causeway out and walked into the island and took Tyre, and it fell very readily to them. But that took a while. So while he was in the area, he spent time in Palestine, and he was, of course, he didn't want to leave Tyre behind. He was on his way to Greece, to Egypt, to take over Egypt. So his influence, imagine these young people seeing this mighty and majestic king and conqueror, and he's the king of the world, and he's a young guy, I mean, he's 30s. And so that really made an impression, apparently, history tells us, on particularly the younger people, the younger priests, were really enamored. And they built gymnasiums, and they built other things all throughout the kingdom to teach of the Greek customs and lifestyle. And it looks like it's 10:30, so I don't know if that's read. All right, we're going to stop. We're going to stop here. So, and let them come in. We'll pick up at this point, finish up this 8th chapter, and we'll move on into the 9th chapter on Wednesday. Questions are in the back on the table, and that'll be the lesson 3.